Before time existed, there was no silence. There was something older than silence. There was no darkness, because darkness had not yet been defined. There was no light, because nothing existed that could be illuminated. There was no form, nor the absence of form. There was no beginning, because there was no end. What existed was not nothing. It was absolute chaos, but not chaos as disorder, not chaos as ruin, rather chaos as indivisible totality, where everything coexisted without distinction. In this primordial state, there was no separation between matter and spirit, between thought and substance, between possible and impossible. Everything was a single, continuous present. The ancients, when attempting to understand this state, resorted to metaphor, because the human mind was never designed to grasp the enough. They called it the primordial ocean, the infinite abyss, the matrix of the universe, the womb of existence. In Egypt, it came to be known as Nun, but that name came later. Before the name, there was only the state. The chaos before time was not static, yet it did not move. It was not conscious, yet it was not unconscious. It simply was. Everything that would ever exist, stars, gods, worlds, ideas, words, lives, was already there, compressed into a state without differentiation. Nothing had happened, and yet everything was already present. This is the strangest and deepest condition of existence, a complete universe that does not yet know that it exists. In the chaos before time, there were no boundaries. There was no above or below, no inside or outside, no near or far. These concepts exist only where reference exists, and there was none. Chaos was an absolute field of potential, where all possibilities coexisted simultaneously without negating one another, without asserting themselves. Nothing was solid, because solidity had not yet been defined. Nothing was fluid, because there was no form to be filled. It was a state prior even to the idea of a state. The ancients understood this intuitively. Chaos was not a thing. It was the condition that allowed anything to exist. In that state, there were no laws, because there was nothing yet to govern. There was no order, because multiplicity did not yet exist. Order and disorder are concepts that arise after separation. Before separation, everything is simply absolute unity. Chaos did not oppose creation. It contained it. Every future form was already there, but without contour. Every future sound was already there, but without vibration. Every future thought was already there, but without awareness. It was like a dream without a dreamer. There was no time passing, because nothing changed. But there was also no eternity, because eternity requires duration. Chaos did not endure. It simply existed without measure. The Egyptians said that none did not age, because aging requires succession, and none knew no succession. In this indistinct state, there was not even the notion of one, because one exists only when two is possible. Chaos preceded unity. It was absolute totality. And it is precisely for this reason that everything could emerge from it. Creation did not arise from lack, but from excess. Chaos was too full to remain indistinct forever, and at some point, impossible to locate. Something began to happen, not outside chaos, but within it. Before there was land, before there was sky, before there was direction or depth, there was an ocean. Not an ocean of water, but an ocean of being. The ancients described the chaos before time as a boundless sea, because water, more than any other element, reflects the nature of the primordial state. Water has no fixed form, yet it contains all forms. It yields, yet it sustains. It dissolves, yet it preserves. Thus they spoke of the primordial ocean, an infinite expanse, without shore, without surface, without bottom. In Egypt, this ocean came to be known as Nun. Nun was not a god who ruled. He did not command, judge, or intend. He was not creator in the active sense. Nun was the condition of creation itself. He was the substrate from which all things could emerge, the silent depth beneath every manifestation. In the primordial ocean, nothing floated and nothing sank, because floating and sinking required gravity, and gravity had not yet been conceived. There was no current, because movement requires direction. There was no stillness, because stillness requires contrast. Nun was not calm, nor was he turbulent. He was undifferentiated fullness. The ocean contained fire without heat, light without brightness, sound without vibration, and matter without mass. Everything existed there in a latent state, compressed into a single, infinite present. This is why the ancients did not describe Nun as empty. They described him as excessive, too full to be defined, too complete to be expressed. The primordial ocean had no center. Every point within it was identical to every other point. There was no place where something began and no place where something ended. This absence of center is crucial. Without a center, there can be no hierarchy. Without hierarchy, there can be no order. Without order, there can be no sequence. And without sequence, there can be no time. None did not exist in time. Time would later exist within what emerged from him. To the human mind, this state is almost impossible to grasp. We instinctively search for edges, origins, causes, but the primordial ocean had none. It was not born. It did not arise. It simply was, without explanation, without necessity. Existence did not need a reason yet. The Egyptians understood something subtle and profound. None was not chaos as confusion. He was chaos as pure potential. Chaos, in its original meaning, is not destruction. It is the absence of differentiation. In None, all distinctions were dissolved. Light and darkness were one. Motion and rest were one. Form and formlessness were one. This is why creation did not require a battle. There was no enemy to defeat, no opposing force to overcome. Creation would later arise, not through conflict, but through emergence. Something would rise from the ocean, not because none resisted, but because none allowed. The primordial ocean was often described as watery darkness, but this darkness was not negative. It was previous. Darkness exists only in relation to light. Before light was conceived, darkness was simply the state of non-illumination. The ocean did not hide things. There were no things yet to hide. It did not obscure. There was nothing yet to be seen. This darkness was not blindness. It was prevision, a state before perception. Within the primordial ocean, there was no separation between observer and observe, because there was no observer. The universe existed, but it did not yet experience itself. Existence was unconscious, but not inert, alive, but without awareness. This distinction is vital. None was not dead matter. He was living potential. He did not need consciousness to exist, but consciousness would eventually arise from him. Just as waves arise from water without ceasing to be water, the ancients sometimes spoke of None as sleeping, but this sleep was not fatigue. It was latency. A seed buried in the ground is not dead. It is waiting. Likewise, the primordial ocean contained within it every future motion, every future law, every future being. But nothing had yet been called forth. Calling requires a voice, and the voice had not yet been formed. In later myths, when gods would rise and worlds would take shape, none would remain beneath everything. Even after creation, he was never destroyed. The Egyptians believed that the universe floats upon none like a lotus upon water. When the world dissolves, it does not fall into nothingness. it returns to the ocean. Creation is temporary. None is eternal. This is why none was both feared and revered, not because he threatened existence, but because he reminded it of its fragility. Everything that emerges can also return. There is a quiet wisdom in this vision. The universe is not held together by force, but by permission. Existence is not imposed upon chaos. It is allowed by it. None does not resist form. He makes form possible. And yet, as long as everything remained undifferentiated within him, nothing could truly exist as something. Potential without distinction is infinite, but it is also silent. For existence to speak, something had to rise, and somewhere within the boundless, scentless depth of the primordial ocean, a subtle shift began. Not a movement of matter, but a movement of attention. The ocean would soon cease to be only potential, not because it was incomplete, but because fullness seeks expression. From the stillness of the abyss, the first stirring approached. Nothing moved in the primordial ocean, yet something shifted. Not a motion of substance, not a ripple in the depths, but a subtle alteration in the state of being itself. It was not visible, it was not measurable, and yet it was irreversible. For the first time, the undifferentiated fullness of chaos was no longer entirely uniform. Within the boundless expanse of none, a point of attention emerged. This was not a location. It was not a place among places. It was a condition. Something began to relate to something else. The universe had not yet formed a shape, but it had begun to form a relationship. This was the first stirring. Before this moment, there was no difference anywhere. After it, there was the possibility of difference. The primordial ocean did not fracture. It did not divide itself into parts. It remained whole. But within that wholeness, there was now a distinction so subtle that it could not be called separation. It was awareness without identity, presence without form. The chaos had begun to notice itself. This awareness did not arrive suddenly. There was no instant of awakening. It emerged gradually, like warmth spreading through still water, imperceptible at first, yet undeniable once it had taken hold. The ancient thinkers struggled to describe this state because language itself depends on distinction. How does one speak of awareness before there is a self to be aware? How does one describe perception before there is an object to be perceived? They could only say this. The chaos began to lean inward. This inward turning was not introspection. There was no inside yet. It was a gathering of potential around a center that did not yet exist, like a breath drawn before the lungs have formed, like a thought before a mind. This gathering created tension. Not tension is conflict, but tension is possibility under pressure. The universe was no longer merely full. It was expectant. The first stirring did not reduce chaos, it intensified it. The undifferentiated totality began to hold itself differently. This is a critical point. Creation does not begin with division. It begins with concentration. Before there can be form, there must be focus. Before there can be light, there must be direction. The first stirring was the birth of direction. With direction came orientation, not space, but the precondition for space. The chaos began to allow one state to stand out from another, not as opposites, but as contrast. Contrast is the seed of perception. Without contrast, nothing can be noticed. Without noticing, nothing can be known. The first stirring introduced the universe to the possibility of knowing. This knowing was not thought. Thought requires symbols. Symbols require separation. This knowing was immediate presence. It did not say, I am. It did not say, this is. It simply was aware, and that was enough to change everything. The ancient Egyptians hinted at this moment when they spoke of the waters becoming aware of themselves. They did not mean consciousness as humans know it. They meant the emergence of self-relation. Chaos began to relate to chaos. The ocean became both depth and surface, even though neither truly existed yet. This duality was subtle, fragile, and temporary, but it marked the end of absolute indistinction. Once awareness exists, it cannot be undone. The primordial ocean could never return to its original unconscious fullness. Something had been introduced that would persist through every future cycle of existence. Awareness had entered being, and awareness seeks expression. The first stirring did not immediately produce form, but it prepared the ground for it. From this point forward, chaos was no longer only a womb. It was becoming a matrix, a field capable of generating structure. This moment is often misunderstood as the beginning. It was not. Nothing had begun yet, but something had become possible that had never been possible before. The universe had gained the capacity to differentiate, and with differentiation, the long path toward time, light, and form had quietly opened. In the depths of the primordial ocean, the first stirring settled. It did not expand outward. It did not seek dominance. It simply remained a silent, attentive presence within infinite potential, waiting, because awareness does not rush. It observes, and in observing, it prepares the moment when existence will finally speak. From awareness came direction, not movement, not motion through space, but the earliest form of orientation. Before this moment, nothing pointed anywhere. There was no toward, no away, no beyond. Existence had no tendency. With the first stirring, that changed. Awareness does not remain neutral. It inclines, it attends. It subtly favors one state over another. This inclination was the first direction. It was not spatial. Space had not yet formed. It was intentional, though not intentional in a conscious sense. It was the universe beginning to lean toward expression. Direction is the most misunderstood force in existence. It is often confused with movement, but movement requires distance. Direction does not. Direction is simply the possibility that something could happen instead of nothing. The primordial ocean did not yet flow, but it had gained the potential to flow. It had acquired a bias, and bias, in the deepest sense, is the seed of creation. The ancients understood this intuitively. They described the first act of creation not as a clash, but as a rising. Something inclined upward, not physically upward, but conceptually. A preference emerged for manifestation over latency. This preference did not negate chaos. It did not diminish none. It introduced asymmetry into totality, and asymmetry is the foundation of all structure. Before direction, every possibility was equally present. After direction, some possibilities became more likely. This does not mean they were chosen. Choice requires identity. It means that the field of potential had begun to organize itself. The universe was learning how to prefer. This is the moment the ancients symbolized with the primordial mound. From the waters of none, a mound rose. Not because the waters parted, but because distinction appeared. The mound was not a physical hill. It was the first defined state, a condition that stood out from the undifferentiated whole. Where there had been no here, there was now the possibility of here. Where there had been no this, there was now the beginning of this. The primordial mound did not yet support form. It did not yet host gods or matter. It was simply a center of orientation. The universe had, for the first time, a reference point. This was a profound shift. With a reference point, comparison becomes possible. With comparison, sequence becomes possible. And with sequence, time will soon follow. Direction introduced a new quality into existence. Tension. Not tension as conflict, but tension as relation between what had been focused and what remained diffuse. between what was emerging and what was still latent. This tension did not break chaos. It stretched it like a membrane beginning to form within infinite depth. The emergence of direction also marked the first limitation, not a boundary imposed from outside, but a boundary arising from within. Totale began to accept the idea that not everything would manifest at once. This acceptance is the foundation of reality. Existence is not everything happening simultaneously. Existence is sequence, and sequence requires direction. At this stage, there were still no forms, no particles, no light, but the universe was no longer static in its fullness. It had gained a vector, a tendency, a leaning toward articulation. The ancient Egyptians described this stage as the moment when the waters became restless, not turbulent, but attentive. The ocean had not yet stirred into waves, but it was no longer asleep. It listened. Direction does not force creation. It invites. It opens a path without compelling it to be taken. The universe was not commanded to exist. It was encouraged. This encouragement would soon find expression in the next great emergence, but not yet, because direction must stabilize before it can support manifestation. The primordial mound remained poised between being and becoming, a silent center within infinite depth. It did not dominate chaos. It did not separate itself from it. It simply existed as a point of reference in a field that had never known reference before. From this point onward, the universe could never return to complete in this. Orientation had entered being, and orientation inevitably leads to differentiation. The path toward form was now open. But the next step would require something even more radical: the emergence of time. Time did not begin with clocks. It did not begin with cycles, nor with the rising and setting of light. Time began with distinction. Before direction emerged, nothing could be compared. Before comparison, nothing could be ordered. And without order, there can be no time. When the primordial mound arose as a point of orientation, the universe gained its first reference. Reference makes difference visible. Difference makes sequence possible. Sequence is the root of time. Time did not flow into the universe from outside. It arose within awareness itself. The chaos before time did not suddenly become temporal. Rather, the emerging awareness began to remember. Memory is the first form of time. Memory does not require language. It does not require identity. It only requires contrast. Something was now experienced as having been one way and then another. This shift, however subtle, created the first before and the first after. The universe had entered history. It is essential to understand this clearly. Time was not imposed upon chaos. Chaos generated time from within. The primordial ocean remained eternal, but within it a process began. Eternity and time coexisted. Eternity was the background, time was the movement upon it. The ancients described this moment as the separation of stillness and motion. Before, there was neither. After, both became meaningful. Motion did not yet involve displacement. Stillness did not yet involve rest. They were qualitative states, not physical ones. The universe began to experience change. Change is not merely difference. Change is difference with continuity. For something to change, it must remain itself while becoming something else. This paradox is the foundation of time. The universe had achieved its first identity, not a form, but a continuity of being. From this continuity arose duration, not measured duration, but experienced duration. The emerging awareness sensed persistent. Something lasted, and something else followed. Time was no longer impossible. The Egyptians hinted at this stage when they spoke of the first moment that was not yet a moment, a threshold, a transition between timelessness and time-bound existence. They did not imagine time as a line, but as a breathing, an expansion and contraction of awareness. With time came anticipation. The universe could now hold expectation. Something could happen next. This capacity changed the nature of potential. Potential was no longer static. It became dynamic. The chaos before time had contained everything equally. Now, some possibilities could unfold before others' sequence had entered the field. Time introduced fragility. For the first time, things could be lost, not yet destroyed. Destruction requires form, but left behind. The universe gained a past, and where there is a past, there can be longing. Time carries memory, and memory carries meaning. Actually, at this stage, there was still no light, no matter, no gods, but the conditions for all of them were now present. Direction had arisen. Time had awakened. The universe was no longer only what it was also what it was becoming. The primordial mound, once merely a point of orientation, now became a moment, not a place in time, but the place where time first occurred. The universe had found its rhythm. From this rhythm, the next emergence would follow. Time alone cannot create. It only allows creation to unfold. Something else was required. A force that could differentiate, that could say this and not this. That force would soon arise as the first act of separation. And with separation, the universe would take its first visible form. Separation did not arrive as violence. It arrived as necessity. Until this moment, everything existed together, held within a single field of awareness. Direction had arisen, time had awakened, but existence was still unresolved. Awareness could perceive change, yet nothing had fully become. For becoming to occur, difference had to be established, not as opposition, but as distinction. Thus began the first separation. The universe did not split apart. It gently differentiated. Where there had been only continuity, there emerged contrast, not light and darkness, yet not matter and spirit, but something more subtle, presence and absence. Presence was what gathered around awareness. Absence was what remained diffuse. Neither was empty. Neither was lacking. They were two modes of the same fullness. This distinction allowed experience to deepen. Awareness could now attend to what was present and sense what was not. The universe learned to recognize what stood forward and what receded. The ancients spoke of this moment as the lifting of the waters. From the infinite ocean of none, something rose, not because it was forced upward, but because differentiation made rising possible. The primordial mound became clearer. No longer just orientation, it became definition. Definition is not forum, it is boundary. Not a wall, but a recognition of limit. Something was now this and not that. This is the most radical moment in existence, because the universe accepted that it would no longer express everything at once. With separation came vulnerability. For the first time, what emerged could be affected by what surrounded it. Before, nothing could be influenced because nothing stood apart. Now, relation became possible, and relation is the doorway to complexity. The first separation did not create enemies, it created perspective. Perspective allows experience to have depth without separation. Everything is equally present and equally inaccessible. With separation, some things can be approached, others can be left behind. This moment is often misunderstood as the birth of duality, but duality had not yet formed. There were not two opposing forces. There was simply the beginning of distinction. Difference without conflict. Contrast without struggle. The universe did not lose its unity, it layered it. Unity remained as the foundation. Distinction arose as expression. This is why chaos was never destroyed. It light became the ground upon which creation could unfold. The Egyptians understood this deeply. They did not imagine creation as a war against chaos. They imagined it as the ordering of presence. The world did not escape, none. It emerged from within him, and none remained beneath all things, even after separation. With separation, structure became possible. Not yet physical structure, but conceptual structure. Something could now be supported by something else. Stability could arise. The first separation also introduced the idea of return. If something could emerge from the whole, it could also dissolve back into it. Creation and dissolution became two movements of the same process. This understanding would later shape every myth of death and rebirth. At this stage, there were still no gods, no elements, no light, but the conditions for them were now firmly in place. Awareness, direction, time, separation. The universe had assembled the framework of existence. The next emergence would be decisive. Separation alone cannot create visibility. For things to be seen, for form to be perceived, something else was required. A force that could illuminate distinction, a presence that could reveal what separation had made possible. That presence would soon arise as the first light. Light did not explode into existence. It did not conquer darkness. It did not arrive as brilliance. Light emerged as revelation. Until this moment, separation existed, but nothing could yet be seen. Distinction without visibility is still incomplete. Light was not created to illuminate space. Space did not yet exist. Light arose to make differentiation perceivable. The first light was not bright. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. It did not shine outward. It clarified inward. The universe gained the ability to recognize what had already emerged. This light did not come from a source. It was the source. The Egyptians understood light not as an object, but as a condition of awareness. Where light appeared, meaning followed. This primordial light did not eliminate chaos. It revealed structure within it. What had been indistinct now carried outline. The primordial mound became visible, not to eyes, but to perception. Existence had crossed a threshold. Light introduced measure. For the first time, something could be more or less. Intensity entered the universe. With intensity came hierarchy, not dominance, but relevance. Some things mattered more than others. Meaning was born. This light was the ancestor of all future suns, all stars, all flames. But it was not physical fire. It was intelligibility. The world became readable. The ancients would later call this light the eye, the foreseeing, the awareness that opens. Without it, creation would remain blind. With it, existence could recognize itself. With light came identity. Not personal identity, not names or faces, but self-consistency. Something could now remain itself across change. This is identity in its purest form. Before identity, everything blended. After identity, continuity emerged. The universe could now sustain forms long enough to be experienced. This stability was fragile but real. Identity allowed differentiation to persist. This was the moment when the first center truly formed. Not just orientation, not just distinction, but presence with coherence. The universe now had something that could be called this. Identity did not isolate, it connected, for only when something is itself can it relate to another. Relation is impossible without identity. Thus, complexity became possible. The Egyptians hinted at this stage when they spoke of the first god who stood alone. Not alone because nothing else existed, but because something finally stood. This standing was not power, it was coherence. Identity marked the transition from process to being. The universe was no longer only unfolding, it was inhabited with awareness, direction, time, separation, light, and identity. The universe reached a threshold. Everything necessary for creation was now present, yet creation itself had not occurred. This is the most delicate moment. Creation does not happen automatically once conditions are met. It requires decision, not a choice in the human sense, but a commitment of process. The universe had to accept that something would emerge that was not reversible. Until now, everything could still dissolve without consequence. After creation, consequence would exist. This is why the threshold matters. The ancients described this moment as the pause before the word, the silence before speech, all breath drawn in. Creation would soon follow as sound, as word, as command, as expression, but not yet, because the universe must be ready to bear what it creates. At this threshold, chaos still remained, not as threat, but as foundation. The order to come would never erase its origin. It would rest upon it. This is where the story pauses, not because nothing else happens, but because what follows belongs to another phase, the phase of gods, of elements, of worlds. Here ends the chaos before time, not with destruction, but with readiness. The universe stands prepared to speak, and when it does, existence will finally begin.